Have you ever wondered what it would take to build a new world? Not just visit, but actually build one. Today, we're diving into the story of New World Builders, or NWB, the private company that dared to dream of terraforming Mars. This isn't just a sci-fi fantasy, it's a cautionary tale about ambition, finance, and the colossal risks of planetary engineering. Imagine this, a company so bold, so audacious, that it convinced investors to pour billions into a project that wouldn't see returns for decades, maybe even a century. That was NWB. Their goal was monumental, to transform the barren red plains of Mars into a lush, habitable planet, a second Earth. But how do you fund something like that? You can't just go to a bank and ask for a loan to create an atmosphere. The financial minds at NWB came up with something truly unprecedented. They pioneered a concept called Exo Terraforming Ventures. The core of their strategy was to use the future value of Mars itself as collateral. Think about it like this. When you buy a house, the bank uses the house as collateral for your mortgage. If you can't pay, they take the house. NWB did something similar, but on a planetary scale. They issued long-term bonds, essentially IOUs, that were backed by deeds to Martian land. Not the red, dusty land of today, but the green, fertile land of tomorrow. Investors were buying a piece of a future paradise. This was a high-stakes bet on the future. They were selling parcels of land prime real estate in future Martian cities, waterfront properties along yet-to-be-formed oceans, and vast agricultural tracts all before a single drop of liquid water existed on the surface. These weren't just bonds, they were tickets to a new frontier, and the market was electric. Early investors, lured by the promise of astronomical returns, snapped them up. The initial public offering was one of the largest in history. NWB's plan was meticulously detailed. They had a multi-stage process. Phase 1 involved deploying a fleet of automated factories to the Martian surface. These factories would pump out greenhouse gases, specifically perfluorocarbons, to warm the planet. The goal was to raise the atmospheric pressure and temperature just enough to melt the polarized caps, which were rich in frozen carbon dioxide and water. This initial phase was a staggering success. Satellites showed the Martian atmosphere thickening. Temperatures began to rise, slowly but surely. The media was in a frenzy, broadcasting every milestone. NWB's stock soared. They became the darlings of the tech and finance worlds, a symbol of humanity's boundless potential. With this initial success, they issued a second, even larger round of bonds to fund the next stage, the creation of a breathable atmosphere. This is where the real science fiction part kicked in. The plan was to redirect a series of comets from the outer solar system. These ice bombs, as the engineers called them, would be carefully guided to impact Mars. Upon impact, they would release massive quantities of water vapor and nitrogen, essential components for a life-sustaining atmosphere. The first few comet impacts went exactly as planned. The data streaming back to Earth was incredible. Atmospheric water content spiked. The first clouds began to form in the Martian sky. People on Earth could watch livid streams of a world being born. NWB's valuation skyrocketed. They were no longer just a company. They were the architects of a new human destiny. The bonds they issued were trading at a premium. Everyone wanted a piece of the new world. But this is where the story takes a turn. The financial structure that had been their greatest strength was about to become their fatal weakness. The bonds NWB issued had maturity dates. That means that on a specific date, NWB had to pay the investors back with interest. These dates were set decades, even a century, into the future, based on the projected timeline for completing the terraforming. The entire financial model depended on reaching key milestones on schedule. For example, once a stable, liquid water ocean was formed, the value of the oceanfront property bonds would mature, and NWB could sell the actual land to pay off the bondholders. It was a brilliant, but incredibly fragile, house of cards. The problem with engineering a planet is that planets don't always follow a business plan. Mars, it turned out, had a few surprises of its own. Deep within the planet, the massive comet impacts, combined with the shifting weight of melting ice caps, triggered something no one had predicted: widespread, low-level seismic activity. At first, it was minor. Small tremors, nothing the automated construction bots couldn't handle. But the activity grew. It wasn't violent like a major earthquake on Earth. Instead, it was a constant, low-grade vibration. This planetary hum began to interfere with the delicate machinery. The atmospheric processors, crucial for converting the CO to rich air, started experiencing constant malfunctions. Nanotechnology designed to release oxygen-producing bacteria into the soil failed to deploy. Correctly, the project timeline began to slip. A 1-year delay became 5. 5 became 10. The geological instability was a fundamental problem they hadn't accounted for. The engineers at NWB worked frantically, trying to develop new technologies to stabilize their equipment, but it was like trying to build a sandcastle during an earthquake. Back on Earth, the financial market started to get nervous. The first series of bonds, backed by the promise of fertile agricultural plains, was approaching its maturity date. But the plains were still barren, shaken by tremors. The land had no real value yet. NWB didn't have the cash to pay the bondholders. Panic set in. The value of NWB's bonds plummeted. Investors who had once bet their fortunes on a new world now saw their investments turning to dust. The company attempted to restructure its debt, to issue new bonds to pay off the old ones, but no one was willing to lend them more money. The confidence that had fueled their meteoric rise was gone. The day the first major bond series matured, New World builders defaulted. It was the single largest corporate default in history. The collapse was catastrophic. The ripple effects crashed through the global economy, wiping out pension funds, investment portfolios, and the life savings of millions who had bought into the dream of Mars. NWB declared bankruptcy. All operations on Mars ceased. The factories fell silent. The cometry directing systems were abandoned. The atmosphere, which had been slowly building, began to dissipate back into space. Mars, for a brief, shining moment on its way to becoming a second Earth, started to revert to the cold, dead world it had always been. The story of New World builders is a powerful lesson. It teaches us about the dangers of high-risk investment in complex financial instruments like collateralized debt. It shows how even the most brilliant plans can be undone by unforeseen variables, especially when dealing with systems as complex as a planet. NWB's ambition was not wrong. The dream of making humanity a multiplanetary species is a noble one, but their failure highlights the immense gap between a vision and its execution. They collateralized a dream, and when reality didn't cooperate, the dream collapsed. The unterraformed land they had used to back their bonds was, in the end, worthless. Today, if you look up at Mars through a powerful telescope, you might see the faint glint of the silent factories and abandoned equipment of New World builders. They stand as monuments to humanity's greatest ambition and its most spectacular financial failure. A reminder that before we try to build new worlds, we need to be sure our foundations, both financial and geological, are solid. What do you think? Was NWB's model doomed from the start? Or were they just victims of cosmic bad luck? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories on the intersection of technology, finance, and the future.